IDPs within Sudan, but also the 1.3 million refugees just in Chad. But of course, like this is an IGAD source country, but most importantly within the IGAD member states who are receiving, we have 565 in South Sudan, 100,000 in Ethiopia, 92,000 in Uganda. We also have, as I was mentioning earlier, the South Sudanese situation, where you have approximately 475,000 in Ethiopia, 202,000 in Kenya, a million in Uganda. So this is by far the biggest number within our region. But of course, like we still have like refugees from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from Burundi, and even though DRC is not from within IGAD, the DRC crisis does influence IGAD countries like Uganda or South Sudan or Kenya. So a bit more detail on the Sudan crisis, which since the 15th of April 2023 represents a lot of focus. It is called the world's biggest displacement crisis because of the number of refugees and also IDPs, but also people that were that accelerated their plans to return to their countries of origin, like in majority from South Sudan, and unfortunately one of the forgotten crises, in particular in this brave new world where humanitarian resources are scarce. Even though we still continue to have a large number of displacements of Sudanese crossing borders in order to seek safety, in order to seek safety, we are also seeing a large number of Sudanese returning to Sudan, in particular from Egypt and from South Sudan, for multiple reasons that we might discuss maybe later. So if we want to look over the past decade, the number of refugees has doubled from 2015 to 2025. The number of IDPs has almost tripled, and the number of asylum seekers has quadrupled. This actually shows not only some of the conflicts that have been discussed by some of the panelists that did the opening for this session, but also shows when you look at, for example, oops, excuse me, sorry, I'll go back. I'm not used to. But if you see, for example, the number of asylum seekers that is increasing, this number basically shows, in a way, more reluctance from countries to agree that the people that are crossing their borders are prima facie refugees. So it shows a trend where, because of the number of refugees that is increasing drastically, that even there is a certain fatigue from the member states in processing the refugee claims of the new arrivals. So in terms of solutions, so in green you can see the returns. You can see the returns of the IDP returns. In 2024, you had 2.7 million, mostly associated to the Sudan situation. You had, compared to, for example, from 2022, in 2024, you had more than 400,000 return. essentially returns to South Sudan, but also some returns to Ethiopia, even though those are minimal compared to the returns to South Sudan. So this is the acceleration of the returns linked to the crisis within Sudan. And then in terms of resettlement, you can see that the number of resettlements has significantly increased in 2023 and 2024. Unfortunately, we can expect that our figures in 2025, due to the policies of many resettlement countries, are going to drop significantly. I'm sure I don't need to say more than that. Just a few numbers so that all of us have an idea a little bit of the lives and the conditions, the living conditions of refugees within the IGAD member states. So on average, refugees spend 8 years in asylum. The refugees in the IGAD region represent 1/5 of the total number of refugees. 79% of the refugees from IGAD countries are hosted within their neighboring countries. So it's important because we often have the narrative of large movements, people crossing the Mediterranean, and things like that. But 4 out of 5 refugees from IGAD are hosted by their neighboring countries, which shows the solidarity of the IGAD region vis-à-vis of their neighbors. 28% of refugees were born in asylum. And out of those 28%, so those 28% represent more or less 1.5 million people. Out of those 1.5 million people, you have 183,000 of them that are now adult. This is why it's so important for us to think about sustainable responses, inclusion, because a person that was born in the countries of asylum and that is now an adult is a person that has very limited links, if it's not through their families, with their country of origin. They are more, if the case would be Kenya, they would be more Kenyan than whatever other nationalities, than South Sudanese or than Somali. So sustainable responses and inclusion into national systems might be some of the solutions that we might continue to promote. 3.3 million refugees have been in asylum in this region for more than 5 years, 1.4 million for more than a decade. Out of the 5.5, 61% are unemployed, 74% are below the poverty line, 60% are of children and young people, 60% are in have primary education, and 19% go through secondary education. And finally, before I'll continue on this last slide, and then I'll pass to my colleague Charles. It was interesting for us to show the numbers of IGAD vis-à-vis of other regional economic commissions. And I would like you to focus on one particular number, which is, oops. Apologies. I would like you to focus on one particular number, this one, where 84% of the refugees in IGAD are IGAD citizens, which means that basically solutions that are found for refugees within IGAD are solutions that are found for IGAD citizens. Thank you. Charles? I'll pass you the baton.
Okay. Thank you very much, Masood, and for a very good outlook of the IGAD region. And I'm just going to deep dive a bit in still within the region. And my work has been made very easy in terms of just showing some of the key trends from 2015 to around 2024, which when you look at the IGAD region, there's always been some increment. And at 2025, as rightly said also by my colleague Maruf, it's already now, when you had both the asylum seekers and the refugees, it's around 5.5 million. And you can see even in terms of the gender, the sex disaggregation, and it has always been going up. So moving forward in terms of the age distribution, it's also important to look into this because as the different issues that we are discussing here also looks into, for example, the economic inclusion, it looks into the issues of the education, it looks into the issues to do with even health. And therefore, as in this disaggregation, you'll find that from 2015 to 2024, still the age group of around 0 to 17, who are majorly children, are still forming the bulk of the refugees within the region, followed by the issues of the working age population between 18 and 59, which also forms a bulk. And the elderly is about some few, a small proportion. And what does this mean? It means that even as we do with the different policies here, we also need to see on how, for example, the economic inclusion, how this labor force, those who are in the working age, can also be utilized, the skill set. And also when we come to issues of 0 to 17, the issues of education. So this is also one of the areas that was showing us. Then when you look at the sex ratio, whereby the sex ratio talking about the proportion between male and female, male to female, you'll find that in terms of the refugee composition, the sex ratio in Eritrea and Somali bit is high, in meaning that majority are male. But when it's less than 100%, that means that majority are women or female. So you can see also there is that issue. Then this one has already been mentioned in terms of the asylum seekers, and my colleague Maruf also spoke about even the 7.9 average year in terms of for them also to be able to gain the other status. So similarly, when you look at the asylum seekers, the same thing scenario is still the same. The age group that too much here, you'll find that now it changes a bit, and now it's the working age population. And also, this also shows some of the dynamics that we really also need to take into consideration. And as I finish, and just to say thank you very much, and that was just a short presentation on the overview of the trends.
I don't need. Thank you very much, Charles. Feels like I'm calling myself, and Maruf, for those oversight on the statistics and the figures that we have in the region. This session is a precursor to the session below on solutions and protection landscape in the region. As it's been presented, majority of the refugees in the region are actually citizens of the region. The numbers have been displayed, over 5 million refugees, slightly considerable number of returnees, but also a huge number of IDPs. The implications, when Ogolo was talking about employment, education, health, and other social services. And then within the context that we are currently operating, where we have challenges both in terms of resources and also the development financing that is coming into the region. Last week, when we were in Djibouti with the commissioners of refugees, we had a very interesting discussion where the refugees felt that they needed to really have a structured discussion in terms of the outlook for the future, both in terms of durable solution, but also the landscape of humanitarian assistance for the IGAD region. We've been told that on average, the refugees in the region stay in asylum for at least 8 years. I'm happy that that number maybe, I don't know whether it is actually showing signs of decrease, because I remember from 2015 when we did a study together with the World Bank, on average it was around 13 years. So I don't know whether that is a marker of progress, a positive development in itself, but I'll leave that to statisticians to interpret. I am not a statistician in a way. Then we also have the fact that the population that we are talking about, since I joined IGAD in 2017, that number has never declined at any point. I remember when in 2017, the total displaced population in the region was around 8 million. I think it was 8.3, if I'm not wrong. And that was both IDPs and refugees. Now we are talking about a figure of around 25, 24 million. That is more than 3 times in less than 10 years in itself. The drivers themselves, on one side, we have conflict as the major driver of displacement in the region. We know that before the Sudan conflict in 2023, Sudan was actually one of the countries that was hosting the largest number of refugees in the region. And though the policy in itself spoke to the issue of encampment, the refugees in Sudan were actually, I think 70% lived out of camps. Countries like Uganda, with the settlement approach. When we started, I think in 2017, the population had not, the refugee population was less than, I think it was around 901 million. Then there was the displacement initially from South Sudan that drove up the numbers. Now we are talking about 1.8, almost 2 million. Figures are going up. In Kenya, I remember when we started the discussion in 2016, when there was the threat to close the Dadaab camp, we were talking about a population of around 350,000, if I'm not wrong. Now that number is almost double the figure. We are talking about 700, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So it's really the region as we speak. When we meet, we also have to have a reflection of the numbers. Of course, on one side, there's the issue of the continued humanitarian support. But on the other side, there's also the issue of durable solution. Of course, it's been highlighted that there are opportunities. People are beginning to return. And if you look at the numbers, I think over the years, you actually see higher numbers. And most of those returns are actually the agencies with the individuals. So it's the refugees themselves who decide that they are better off in their countries of origin, than in the countries of asylum. But what we've also seen is that the return in themselves, in most cases, they are not permanent. There's a lot of movements between the countries of asylum and the countries of origin. And when I talk to my commissioners, or the one thing I think where there's general consensus is usually on the issue of pendular movements. In a way, everyone is against pendular movements or onward movements from the countries of asylum to other countries. I know that there are countries like Kenya and Uganda, you've had instances where there have been onward movements, and they've actually been collaboration of either moving people back to the first country of asylum. Yeah? And if you are to look into the future as well, in terms of anticipating the future movement, particularly in the current dynamics, in the current context where the humanitarian support is declining, in my estimation, I have no research, I'm just speaking as somebody who woke up in the morning and had a bad dream, but I feel like we are going to experience more pendular movement or more onward movement because the agency is with the individual. I would also think that there will be a lot of movements to the countries of origin in terms of self-induced returns. But I don't think they'll also be permanent because it is more of a scoping. You just want to see whether there are opportunities there. In Uganda and South Sudan, we've seen this particularly where in the cross-border areas, there's a lot of circular mobility. You'll find it's actually one member of the household, perhaps the man, who moves back to South Sudan to look for opportunities. In most cases, the family will stay in Uganda because the kids are, the wives will stay in Uganda because the kids are going to school and that kind of thing. But the men would probably be in South Sudan and sending in remittances, yeah? So it's a collective of how we look at these issues, both in the countries of asylum, but also in the countries of origin. I know if you go to South Sudan, particularly within the South Sudan Solutions Initiative, we had very robust discussions with the member states, and we brought in all the stakeholders. And we agreed on a number of priorities. I think there were 5. John, you'd assist here and correct me. But we also agreed on potential areas where perhaps solutions can be piloted and tailored to specific context. That information is available. In South Sudan, we went as far as developing a national strategy for durable solution, together with a plan of action, which in a way has been endorsed at the highest political level, but also it forms as a guiding instrument to most of the operational partners. We've set up coordination structures in almost all the IGAD member states, some form, led largely by the refugee commissions. We've supported regular dialogues with the member states on specific thematic issues, both at the national and at the regional level. In the lead up to this Stocktake, we actually had 3 roundtables, one on refugee protection that took place in Nairobi. There was one on urbanization that took place in Addis Ababa, and we also had one on climate change that also took place in Addis Ababa. So all these issues and dynamics in the region come into play as we anticipate how refugees are actually going to respond to the current dynamics. And therefore, for this session, we had felt that it will be a discussion, one between the member states themselves in terms of the dynamics and the current context that you're operating in, but also to have a honest reflection of how we are likely to address the challenges, because I don't think we will be able to resolve and address the needs of all the 25 million plus people, say within the next 2 years. So how are we going to address their needs, both in the countries of asylum, but also in the countries of origin? And that is how we ended up with this particular session. So it was meant to be a dialogue, an open dialogue, on both on the challenges, on the issues that are coming up, but also how we feel the issue should be collectively addressed as a region, because the population that we are dealing with is largely citizens of the region in itself. And I think that should be the starting point, that these would be people who would otherwise enjoy the rights that perhaps most of us are enjoying if they were not facing persecution. So I would not want to talk too much, but perhaps invite especially the countries to perhaps reflect on the national dynamics. I know that we'll have a session on the follow-up and review, but this is really on the context and the dynamics and anticipatory actions as we move forward. So I would not want to own this session, but I would open it up to interventions from member states, the partners, and all the stakeholders in the room, including those who are living the experience themselves, the refugee representatives in the room to contribute. I would want to put somebody on the spotlight if he's not raising his hand already, but I'll give him the benefit of doubt and assume that he's prepared. And I know he'll be the first speaker. So I leave the floor open. If you have opportunities. John, you know I'm looking at you, so I'll give you the floor, even if you're not requesting for it.
Okay, Charles, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'd like to thank everybody, particularly our member states, in really coming together at this time to reflect and take stock of progress made on our GRF pledges. I just wanted to highlight one important issue on the solution aspect, because I realized, even in the presentation previously on the data, South Sudan has the most affected population who are refugees currently in the region. Also, we have internally displaced population, which also is a significant number. So going forward, I think there is need to look at the dynamics, as you mentioned. And one of the dynamics is about return. Currently, since 2018, since the signing of our peace agreement, people have been coming back. From Sudan alone, we have 1.2 million return, forcefully returned. From Uganda, we have close to 600,000. And the data continues. From Kenya, Kakuma, we have 9,000 recently, and so on. But the fact is, I think we need to also change the dynamics to look at the return. How do we sustain these people to stay back instead of the pendulum movement that was discussed, so that people don't go back? Now, that also gives us the opportunity to look at the gap. What makes these people to go back? There is peace in the country. Maybe we don't have conflict as it was before 2018. And we need to also look at, when these people come, what are the issues that needs to be addressed? For example, I was just talking informally to our EU colleague who presented. Yes. And I did mention to him that partners and donors really need to look at carefully how we can stabilize the return as a solution. Because if you look at the cities where people are returning, for example, Awil is peaceful. You have 600,000 people in Awil who are from, return. We have about 25,000 refugees. We have about, IDPs and so on. Now, why can't we think, okay, let's stabilize Awil as a city, like what Koboko has done. EU comes in and support, World Bank support, partners, they draw synergies and say, okay, if it is about school, what investment can we put in a school to attract these people to stay instead of going back to Uganda or going back to Kenya to look for education or to look for health services and things like that. In that way, you can address this whole issue of